So the plant growth, as we are looking at the types of beans, we have what is called determinate growth, which means that the plant grows to a stage, goes into the reproductive phase, and then stops blooming. And then the indeterminate phase is where the plant actually keeps on blooming throughout the season if the conditions are uh, good enough for plant growth. Most of our crop is indeterminate growth habit. So if we are looking here on this slide, on the left, we have two types, the determinant and the indeterminate type. Then we have a number, the grouping 1, 2, 3, and 4. And in many of the variety trials, we indicate what type is available for the various varieties that are indicated in the booklet. So the types are then kind of defined as 2 and 2A, 2B. So mostly in our region, we are looking at the upright short vine and the upright vine types. We have moved away from the kind of the not upright varieties due to the ability of the upright to be harvested directly. So here is kind of a visual of the different architecture. And if we are looking, starting from the left, that we call the bush type, then the second type that is kind of ideal for direct harvest is the upright. The prostrate is really more difficult to harvest and usually requires two operations, first putting the crop down and then harvesting it directly. The climbing type is not quite common in our region except for home gardens. We are having a nice new dry bean production guide available that can be found by just Googling NDSU dry bean production guide. And you will get the publication as is indicated on the left bottom of the slide. If we go to page 11 to 13, there you will find a description, and I'm going to quickly over some of the stages of the growth of the plant. In this booklet on figure 1, we have a nice kind of pictorial on the growth and development of the plant in the initial stages. As we put the seed in the ground, it starts to swell and the roots are going down. It pushes the seed up and it forms then a small plant which has the cotyledon stage, the first that come out, and then the first leaf in 90-degree opposite of the cotyledon are the unifoliate. So the picture on the right of the plant, I'm going to point out a few things. So just above the soil line, the first two is the cotyledon. Then the next two are called the unifoliate. Continuing with the growth, then we go to what is called the trifoliate. So the unit where the three are joined together is called the trifoliate because it has 3 leaflets together to a stem towards the plant. Now it is important to know that in the leaf axis where the leaf and the stem meets, there are axillary buds that can grow and make some branches. And so if anything happens to the plant and there are still buds left, then the plant can regrow from that area. So there are also axillary buds in the unifoliate, and as we continue to grow, it will be also in the trifoliate and where the stem meets. So I'm going quickly over a couple of the stages just pictorially. On the left, it is the crook stage, or when the plant is just pulling the cotyledons through the soil. This is a very critical stage of the plant. If anything happens, then we are basically done for in plant growth because there are no growing points below the crook. Also, if we're thinking about maybe land rolling, if you roll at this point, it's easy to break that crook and lose the whole plant. The next picture in the middle is where you see the cotyledons on the bottom, and you see the 2 bigger leaves called the unifoliates. When we are looking at the top of it, we have the growth stages indicated. So this is called the V stage or the unifoliate stage. When we go to the right of the picture, we see the V1, that is the first trifoliate visually seen here. From the top, you can see the growing point is right in the center of the plant, and the part that you can see on the near the growing point will be the next leaf. So as we are looking at growth stages, they are important to kind of know because many of the labels will indicate growth stages for application of fungicides, pesticides, the herbicides, etc. So in the picture on the left, we can see that there are now two trifoliates visible. So the top one and the bottom one here, those are now fully enrolled. So when you're starting counting the growth stages, we always look only at the main stem and when the leaves are completely unrolled. So as you go to the center, you can see more leaves development, and then at about the V5 to V8, depending on the type, we see that there is a kind of a flowering bud or initially flowering starting to show up. And then we start to change from the vegetative to the reproductive phase. And R1 stands for reproductive. The first flower is opening up. And then from there, we start to see that the flowering continues on the plant as well as the pod development. So the R2 stage is when we see that at the first flower, which was kind of on the bottom of the plant, we see that there is a development of the pod. And as we are starting to develop pods, we also see that the bloom is continuing in the plant. So we have bloom and pod developing taking place at the same time. So R3 is about 50% bloom. Then when we go to full pod, we are always looking at where the first flower was and look at those pods. So here you can see a pod that is about 3 inches long, that is called full pod. Then we transition to the filling of the pods with actually the beans. On the right, you see the R5, that is the beginning of the seed filling period. This is a little bit of a busy slide, but you can see starting from the top, the R6 is 50% seed set. We go to R7, full seed. Then the color of the pod starts to change at the beginning of maturity at the R8 stage, following by the R5 when we get to the middle of maturity. And then finally at 9, R9, we are fully mature. The seeds are beginning to harden. And because the plant keeps on blooming, we will see that there are different stages of pods on the plant. At some point, we can see that we are reaching that R5 when 80% of the pods are ripening. And we may still have some green leaves. And of course, that is a little bit before the harvest period. The next point I'm going to talk about is looking at some of the variety selection that we can do. We do have an extension bulletin. The easiest is to Google NDSU variety trial results. That will be at the URL indicated on this slide. So this one will be the landing page that you will come on. You will then click on the trial result publication and you will get the publication in the PDF format. There are also published documents available at extension offices throughout our state where you can pick them up. So on the left, you see the kind of the layout of the dry bean selection guide. And in that guide, we have several locations, and it is always advisable to look at the trends of the varieties, how they perform over various locations and not just at one location by itself. We are using a term called LSD, that is the least significant difference. That is a statistical term on the bottom of the page, which indicates if there is a true difference between two varieties, the difference needs to be more than the LSD value. We also report a coefficient of variation, and typically for our trials, we want to see a coefficient of variation lower than 20%. If it is higher, the data in the trial is a little bit more, there's more noise in that data set. So I'm going to report on a few of our different types of varieties. As we know, we have quite a few varieties or types that can be grown in North Dakota. The main are the Pinto, the Black, and the Navy. Those are the ones I will concentrate on today to discuss. In the booklet of 2019, I looked at the 7 environments that are reported. You can look at each table individually. This is a compilation of the data looking at the black bean yield in pounds per acre of some of the common varieties available in our region. You can see the letter above the bars. If the letter is the same, like the A's, those are not significantly different. The Loreto is significantly lower yielding than the blacktails or the Eclipse. We do have a new black bean variety that has come out of the breeding program. It is called ND Twilight. It is not yet available. It will be in the increase this particular year, so that it will be available for farmers in the coming years. It is quite similar in dry down to Eclipse. It is a little earlier, 2 to 3 days earlier. It has an upright plant architecture that is important for our harvesting of the crop. In this slide, we have a couple of examples of how beans look like, and it is comparing the new Twilight with the Zorro, the Loreto, and the Eclipse, a very nice looking bean. So if we compare the new bean, the North Dakota Twilight, with some of the other varieties over a longer period from 2014 to 19, we see that it out-yielded Eclipse slightly, and it is a very nice looking bean, as you saw. Now I'm looking at the Pinto, and one of the things that the breeding program has been working towards is to look at a gene that provides a slow darkening of the Pinto bean. On the bottom, you see a kind of a little dish with a slow darkening bean versus a Pinto bean that does not have the slow darkening. And you see it is quite a bit darker in its appearance. Last year was a kind of an unusual year with very wet conditions. Some of the plots could not be harvested, and so some of the researchers went into the plot really late in the season in November, which is past the normal harvest time, and just to see what happened to the beans. So they harvested a few plots. So here you see Windbreaker is a normal Pinto variety versus the ND Palomino or the Vibrant, and you can see that the color of that North Dakota Palomino is quite a bit lighter than the darkening. So why the darkening gene, and why is it important? So the perception of the customer is that dark beans are old and may take a longer time to cook. And from a grower, you might think that darker beans are maybe less germination and lower vigor. So there is a benefit of looking this for the marketing aspect. The consumer likes to see a nice looking colored Pinto bean. So the environment, light, temperature, and rainfall have an influence on how the Pinto may darken, also included storage and diseases. But as mentioned on this slide, variety has a big effect, and that is what has been now incorporated in some of the varieties. One other factor that is under research is the bioavailability of iron. And what has been found is that the Palomino and the Vibrant, and if you look here at the scale on the left, that is the availability of iron, is quite a bit higher than of the regular Pinto, the Windbreaker La Paz of Lariat. So there might be an advantage also for the nutritional value of the slow darkening bean. Now I'm going to look at some of the yields of Pinto beans. This is from 2019. That is all gathered from the variety data booklet. And you can see that there is variety differences, and we suggest that you pay attention to varieties that are doing well in your region. Here is looking at a comparison between some of the varieties that are released by NDSU recently, that is ND Falcon and ND Palomino, compared to some of the varieties that have been on the market a little bit longer. So the yields are right in that 21 hundredweight region here in this slide. The next group of beans is the navy beans that I would like to discuss briefly. This is over 7 environments, yields between Blizzard, Medalist, and T9905. And as you can see, the bars all have an A, indicating that there was really no significant difference across those 7 environments for those particular varieties. There are more varieties mentioned in the various tables per location, so you can pay attention to those numbers. So as we are looking at some of the management tips for the seed treatment, it is important, especially if we are looking for maximizing emergence, especially as we are still very cool this year and have many fields that have been wet, coming out of a wet fall, as well as the snow melt this season. So we have to also be careful when you put fertilizer down, that fertilizer really can reduce the germination if the fertilizer is too close to the seed. And we do recommend that you do some stand counts to really know what kind of stand you have at the onset of the season. When we talk about seed and variety selection, we need to realize that most seed lots have a different germination percent, so it's always good to have a germination test and then to adjust your seeding rate, also realizing that maybe 10% of the seed that you put into the soil may not germinate.